Hi, everybody. It's Jim Ostrowski with the Liberty Moving Podcast. Nice fall day in Buffalo. Still fooling around with my selfie stick. You can buy me a new one if you want. Just something a little different today. I've had a couple of interactions on social media about the Second Amendment and the First Amendment, and a lot of pushback. So my contention, that's what I'm going to talk about today, and why it's important in the context of the election and everything else that's going on. So it's my contention, first of all, that there's only one country that has a right to bear arms. I get pushback on that. It's also my contention. I'm absolutely firmly correct about that. I'll talk about that in a second. My other contention is a lot more controversial and problematical, which is that the United States is the only country with a First Amendment. And on that one, I think I am correct. Still working through it, but I'll explain what I did and what the problem is with other countries allegedly having a First Amendment when they in fact do not. And I think we can. This audience at least can agree, these are the two most important rights. If you don't have the right to defend yourself and you don't have the right to speak freely and communicate, particularly about politics, then there's essentially no way to change anything. And if you have no First Amendment, then it's pretty much an invitation to violence, because how else are you going to change anything? So that's why these are important issues. So let's talk about the right to bear arms first. Now, you do a little Google search, you find out there's various answers to this, but the best answer is there's 3 countries in the world other than the U.S. that have a right to bear arms in their constitution, and that is true. But it's a qualified right. So those countries are Guatemala, Mexico, and Haiti. I've read all the constitutions. I'm not going to go into detail. If you read the language, though, of those 3 countries, it's very weak, and it's not strong, and there's exceptions and qualifications and all this stuff. Whereas in the American Constitution, the operative clause there is the right to bear arms, keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It's very strong. You can quibble about what arms are, what bear means. You can quibble about the word infringed. But outside of that, it's a statement. It's a strong statement of rights, and there's no qualification. There's no exception. And so it's interesting, though, that these people on the web seem to not understand this. I've explained it to them many times. They had one interaction on TikTok. I explained all this and so on. And then I just recently had an interaction on Twitter. But the more controversial statement, and I spent some time, I was up super early today researching this for the show. But the more controversial question is there a right of free speech in other countries? We know that we have one. And that's a little tougher because there's 165 countries. It's difficult to prove a negative, I suppose. So what I did is I found a site, and I don't have the actual name of the site right in front of me, but if you Google this, like First Amendment countries rating, you'll see the site I'm talking about. And it squares with the other various rankings that are out there. So what I did was I went through the top 8 or so countries that this website had ranked as pro free speech, or indicating that got a little traffic here at Kenmore Avenue, indicating that there was a constitutional right of free speech. And I drilled down the list. I checked out every country on there, and my conclusion was none of them have a right to free speech. There's qualifications, there's exceptions. The main exception I found was hate speech laws. Now, that requires a bit of explanation. So we do have these hate speech laws in the U.S. I think I'm generally opposed to them. But they're not pure hate speech laws in the sense that if you commit an act of violence and you're motivated by race hatred, for example, it's a higher level of crime for which you could be sentenced to a stiffer penalty, whatever. As far as I know, we don't have pure hate speech laws in the U.S. If we did, they should be, excuse me, they should be challenged as unconstitutional. But these other countries have, for want of a better term, these pure hate speech laws. And in other words, they just punish speech. And so I went through the entire list. Each one of them had these laws. And therefore, it's obvious to me, you could quibble, you could argue about it, and that's fine, that they don't have a full right of free speech. And what's the point of having an incomplete right of free speech? So the real problem with these hate speech laws, and I've read some of them, they're very, very broadly worded to the point where you never really know if what you say is going to violate these laws and then, end up in jail. Like there's plenty of these prosecutions in the UK. I can't think of specific examples, but that's one country that seems to be, prosecuting free speech a lot. It'd be interesting to know that two of our closest allies, quote, do not have free speech or a right to bear arms, and that would be England and Israel. And I don't know how many people are aware of this. Neither of those countries have a constitution at all. Isn't that interesting? Our two closest allies, according to some people. And I'm not a huge fan of constitutionalism. I think our Constitution has many fine ideas in it. I wish there was a way to make the government comply with it. It really isn't. Because when you have a dispute with the government resolves the dispute with their own courts. I say, wow, that's fair. We're generations of lawyers, judges, and smart people have been led to believe or led others to believe that that's actually fair when that actually makes zero sense. And it doesn't work, as witnessed by the fact that the government has grown tremendously in size, scope, and power in spite of the Constitution. You think that there would be some limitations on that. So I'm not a huge fan of constitutionalism, but it's a little concerning that these countries don't have any constitution at all. At least the Constitution is something you can point to, and say, hey, the government's violating this. What are you guys doing? That's the great thing about the right to bear arms, by the way. The reason why there's been some respect for the right to bear arms, in my cynical theory of courts, is that you can F around with some of the clauses of the Constitution, like the Gold Clause and the Contract Clause and ex post facto and Bill of Attainder and all these complicated Latin terms. But most people seem to understand what the right to bear arms means. It's plain English. It's hard to fool around with it, although the leftist judges do fool around with it and have played around with it. But still, if the Supreme Court were to say there's no right to bear arms, I think people would be really pissed and would be inclined to start questioning, why do we have a Supreme Court again? It's supposed to tell us what the Constitution means when we kind of know what the Constitution means already. So it's possible that a country, going back to that list, it's possible that a country that is lower ranked for free speech might have an actual bona fide right to free speech in the Constitution. I think it's unlikely. I think and I'll go through the rest of the list, when I have time. But I think it's unlikely that if you have a lower score, you're going to have a better a constitutional right to free speech than the ones that have already flunked because of hate speech laws and Holocaust denial laws and all that stuff. And you might say, well, this is obnoxious speech, we shouldn't have it. But, even in the Holocaust denial field, which I probably shouldn't even talk about, but some of these laws are so broad. If you write any serious scholarship and you're not down with whatever the official line is on any detail, I mean, that could be considered hate speech and a crime, and we shouldn't criminalize free speech. We shouldn't criminalize academic discussion about historical issues, obviously. So hence the title of this podcast, and I think I'm going to do a bumper sticker which says, "No Second Amendment, no First," because isn't it odd that the only country in the world where there's true free speech, although there's exceptions and violations of it, we could talk about it on another occasion, it's not perfectly respected. But, you can write a book saying that the U.S. government should not exist and should be abolished, and you won't get arrested for it. And how do I know? I've done it. So there is a significant protection for free speech. And I know if I was in several other countries on the planet, I would not be allowed to say that. I would be deported or thrown in jail, or at least the books would be confiscated. So why is any of this important? And the reason I bring this up is because Candace Owens got her visa pulled for political speech, essentially. I don't know the exact details of it, but it's political speech. And even if it's not political speech, it's speech about history or commentary or culture or whatever. And all of that's encompassed in the First Amendment. And so that's how I got onto this discussion, because I pointed out that the United States has a security arrangement with Australia. And there's a federal statute that says not in so many words, but I'm paraphrasing it, and there's reasonable debate about what it means. It's vaguely worded, but there is a federal statute, which I've already brought to the attention of the State Department on Twitter, that says that the United States shall not provide security assistance to countries that have human rights violations. Well, in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the United Nations, free speech is in there. Obviously, it's in the First Amendment as well. And to deny a visa to somebody, actually, it explicitly violates the language of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is 1948. So, but to deny a visa to somebody based on the content of their speech is certainly a violation of free speech. And by the way, Australia is another country that doesn't even have a constitutional amendment protecting free speech. But if you drill down in it, they say, well, the courts have found there's an implied right of free speech, whatever. I'm not buying that too much. So judges can always change their minds, as opposed to constitutions, which aren't so easily changed. But obviously, even though Candace Owens is not an Australian citizen, Australian citizens, if they're going to be voting in a democracy, should have access to speakers from all over the world, or online or physically, in order to hear their points of view. And if you can't have free political speech in that sense, the whole concept of having elections in Australia is pointless. If you can't have free speech, there's no point in having elections, because the government will basically just control the flow of information and end up with whatever election result. In other words, it's a sham. It's a sham election, and so that's how I brought that up. So, a little advertisement for the podcast. I have the reason why the content on this podcast is not available anywhere else is pretty simple. I have a skill set that's not replicated anywhere else. I'm not saying that there's people who aren't more skilled than I am in all sorts of different fields. What I'm saying is, if you look at my skill set, somebody has done complex litigation and constitutional law for 40 years, and that is if you don't have that background, you're not even going to be aware of these legal issues that come up, and you're not going to bring them up, and you're not going to tweet to the State Department about it and ask that they revise their country report on Australia, because the Australia country report says, oh, they have free speech and freedom of movement. Well, that's not freedom of movement when you're denying, or free speech when you're denying a passage to a woman because you don't like her political views. And they, by the way, they also shoot rubber bullets at protesters in Australia. So that's one of the reasons to watch the podcast. I have that skill set in that. I'm the most experienced political operative in the liberty movement. I think that's a fact. I'm not bragging. That's just a fact. And I studied economics under Rothbard and blah, 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 blah. So what I try to do on the podcast is bring everything together. So let's sort of bring all this together and make it relevant to what's happening now. Yeah, it's interesting. Ostrowski proves how smart he was by proving that there's only one country in the world with the right to bear arms. And by the way, there's only one country in the world, and this is a provisional conclusion. I will go through the rest of that list, but I think it's, at most, you might find one or two countries, almost like, well, there's 165 countries, If there's one or two exceptions to what I'm saying, it almost doesn't really, there's the exception that proves the rule, as Francis Bacon said. So why are we the country? It's kind of scary. I guess my point is that, we are the last best hope on earth. This has been said before, but not exactly with the meaning I'm putting into it. The right to bear arms is a product of sort of a philosophical worldview, as is free speech. There's no doubt that free speech comes out of the historical liberty movement. There's a book on that I reviewed years ago. I think the author was Jonathan Emmerd. So the free speech is a libertarian accomplishment, right? That's just a fact. It's just a fact. Don't go looking in history for the word libertarian, because the term wasn't there. There's various terms for what these people were called, but the old British Whigs, or the Levelers, or I like to call them, because they get no credit, the pre-founding fathers, they were libertarians. Now, the right to bear arms, I don't know. I'm not super obsessed with the origin of the right to bear arms. But certainly, if it came about by historical accident or custom, or some common law, judge in England, or some commentator, if you look at the spirit behind it, it's libertarian as well. The exact roots of it are a little foggier than the roots of the First Amendment, First Amendment is clearly a libertarian production. But libertarians also propounded and helped, protect and put into positive law the right of free speech. So where does that leave us? Well, this is where it leaves us. How many libertarians are there in the United States right now? 10% of the population. I'm talking small L libertarian. I'm not talking about that Libertarian Party. Come on, give me a break. Small L libertarians, we're like 5 or 10% of the population. And, we're in danger of going extinct at any given time. And not only that, if you look at the two parties, the Democratic Party hates the right to bear arms. And they have approximately half of the voters on their side, as you see in any given presidential election. What do they have, like 48%? I predict Kamala is going to get 46%. I think she's going to do a nosedive. Of course, if the Trump people keep hiring comedians, geez, you got to be effing kidding me. But I think, my official prediction, I'm sticking to it, is 51-46. But approximately half of the people in the country are Democrats. These people hate the right to bear arms. The whole gun control movement is simply an appendage of the Democratic Party. They're identical. If you look at the staff, the people run, I checked this out. I didn't put it in my book specifically, but I put it in as a general conclusion. I checked out the pedigree of 6 or 7 key staffers in the gun control movement. Almost every single one of them used to be a Democratic political operative, or somebody who actually worked for a Democratic office holder. So that's the Democratic Party. And you say, well, the Democrats are a little bit more supportive of free speech, but when you look at it analytically, I got a couple more minutes to go, but I kind of like, where the podcast has gone. And I'm going to try to sort of wrap it up. So here's the problem with the Democratic Party. It's now a left progressive party. Leftism is a desire to make everybody equal. And progressivism is this notion that it's a difficult world and we need the government to solve all of our problems. So none of these ideologies make no sense. They're emotion based, and I've written about this extensively. But where in the ideology of the Democratic Party is there room for the individual to say whatever the hell he wants anytime he wants to? It's nowhere. So the Democrats are not a reliable protector of the First Amendment or the Second Amendment, obviously. So now, as far as the Republican Party until the last few years has never been particularly strong on the First Amendment. They're getting that way now because they're getting punched in the face by the a fascist democratic regime, which is prosecuting people for free speech, jailing people for free speech, and regulating the internet so that to affect the results of an election. Obviously, that happened in 2020. Come on, give me a break. Everybody knows that. So, but now the Republicans, they seem to have been waking up. Yeah, free speech is important. Well, you guys can thank the libertarians because we've always been pro-free speech. Again, it's like everybody laughs at the libertarians, but they always come back to us because we have all the fucking answers, right? Yeah, right. If I do say so myself. What about the right to bear arms? Well, yeah, Republican Party has given a lot of lip service to the right to bear arms, but as evidenced by Donald Trump's answer the other day about school shootings, it's like, you people need to up your game. That's why I wrote these two books. They don't seem to be able to articulate the true spirit, meaning, purpose, history, and evidence in favor of the right to bear arms. So I'm going to close on one big final thought. In the whole world, you got one country, not a little country, but one country, 6% of the population of the world, something like that believes in the two fundamental rights in my view, without the Second Amendment. You're not going to have a First Amendment. And no Second Amendment, no First is the point. That's the bumper sticker. That's the title of this program. So what is the political future of the Republican Party in a country where the power elite is re-engineering the population through massive legal and illegal immigration? And as Elon Musk has pointed out, it's interesting that they're sending the bulk of the migrants, whatever you want to call them. Maybe they have some sort of half-assed permission to be here, but really in violation of federal law because they're not supposed to be here under the laws passed by the Democrats. I'm not quoting myself here. I'm quoting the passport and immigration laws that the Democratic Party put into effect. They're not supposed to be here. But where are they going? Well, they're going to red state America and small community. Not only red state America, they're going to the reddest part of red state America, which is the small towns. So I hope all of that gives you butterflies in your stomach, because it's a scary development. The First Amendment is hanging by a thread, only exists here, and is only supported by some people in one party. And the Second Amendment only exists here in the whole world and is only supported by some people in one party. And the people who control the country right now want to swamp that party by bringing in a bunch of people who they think do not support these values. And coming from the world where these values are not supported, that's a very reasonable conclusion to draw. So I'm going to end it on that note. I hope this has been interesting educational experience. Have a great day, everybody.